In every age, humanity has faced a recurring threat not born from nature or war, but from within: the collective impulse to condemn, to scapegoat, to punish. This force wears many faces: the frenzy of the crowd, the digital pile-on, the public shaming, the call for heads on metaphorical platters. It is known as mob mentality, and it thrives on fear, conformity, and moral disengagement. Against this tide, agape love stands alone. Slow to anger, grounded in truth, and courageous enough to love even when it costs something. Mob mentality is not simply a group with shared opinions. It is the emotional storm. Mob mentality is the emotional storm that surges when individual conscience is replaced by the will of the crowd. It can look righteous, it can sound moral, but often it is anything but. Agape, by contrast, is not emotional. It is not impulsive. It is not reactive. It is the highest form of love. The anatomy of a mob. Mob mentality thrives on 5 ingredients. 1, an instigating voice, a charismatic figure or opinion leader who directs outrage toward a person or group. 2, emotional contagion. As fear or anger spreads, reason diminishes. 3, de-individuation. People lose their sense of self, morality is diffused. 4, simplification of truth. Complex situations are reduced to black and white narratives. 5, public spectacle. Shame becomes entertainment, not correction. This pattern is not new. We saw it in ancient Rome, where crowds called for gladiators to die for sport. We saw it at Golgotha, where people who once cried, "Hosanna," screamed, "Crucify him." And we see it now, online, on airwaves, in movements that begin with good intentions but degrade into demonization. Agape love calls something higher out of us, the ability to see the image of God not just in the innocent, but even in the accused, the crowd and the cross. At the center of Christian history is the crucifixion of Christ, not by a solitary villain, but by a system and a crowd. Pilate washed his hands, the mob roared. Peter denied him to blend in. Only a few stood firm at the foot of the cross. Agape was crucified that day, and it rose again not with vengeance, but with forgiveness. This is the radical demand of agape, that we not only love the victim, but that we reject the dehumanization of the villain, lest we become villains ourselves. It does not mean condoning evil. It means resisting the temptation to simplify others into caricatures. Mob mentality strips people of personhood. Agape restores it. The psychology of the crowd. Psychologists like Gustave Le Bon and later Philip Zimbardo warned how easily ordinary people can commit acts of cruelty when swept into the anonymity of a group. The Stanford prison experiment showed how quickly role, costume, and collective identity distort the conscience. Mob behavior taps into primal instincts: to belong, to survive, to align with strength. But agape moves against those instincts. It says, even if I stand alone, I will stand for the truth. Even if it costs me my popularity, I will not join in the destruction of a soul. What agape is and is not agape is not passive tolerance. It is not softness, weakness, or appeasement. It is the strongest kind of love, precisely because it resists the pull of vengeance and remains anchored in justice and mercy. Agape tells the truth, but not to destroy. Agape corrects, but never humiliates. Agape weeps over harm, but weeps also for those who cause harm, longing for their conversion. Agape does not demand perfect people. It demands courageous ones. When the internet becomes the Colosseum, in our time, the Colosseum is digital. Mobs are not in the streets, but in comment sections. Instead of lions, we throw accusations. Instead of swords, we use screenshots. Cancel culture, often rooted in real grievances, can quickly mutate into unrelenting cruelty. Agape never trends. It doesn't go viral. It's quieter than outrage, but it is also indestructible. One act of agape love, one person who refuses to join the mob, can change the entire moral temperature of a situation. Why we join the mob? It's seductive, to feel morally superior, to feel safe in numbers, to signal virtue without making sacrifices. Mob mentality flatters the ego and hides behind causes. But agape calls us to discern, to pause, to ask, do I know the whole story? Am I loving the truth or just loving the drama? Agape asks hard questions. Would I still speak this way? If the accused were in the room? Would I still post this if it were my own friend or parent? Is my heart anchored in love or in pride? If the answer indicts us, agape invites us to repent, not in shame, but in hope. Historical echoes. Throughout history, the most terrifying injustices have been crowd-approved. The Salem witch trials, the lynch mobs of the Jim Crow South, the public executions of the French Revolution, the scapegoating of entire groups under fascist regimes. These were not the acts of a few lunatics. These were the acts of everyday people swept into collective delusion. Agape is the only force strong enough to say, "No, I will not be part of this," even when that means being cast out of the group. Saints against the crowd. History also gives us those rare souls who lived agape in the face of mob rage. Saint Maximilian Kolbe, who stepped forward in a Nazi camp to die in another man's place, a silent defiance of group evil. Saint Edith Stein, who entered the suffering of her people in solidarity, not anger. Saint Oscar Romero, who spoke against the violent crowd and was martyred for it. They were not rewarded in life, but they are radiant now, not because they won, but because they loved. The crowd will move on. Crowds don't stay. They move on to the next controversy, the next target. But the damage left behind, reputations ruined, psyches shattered, truths distorted, remains. Agape stays behind. Agape helps rebuild. When we resist the mob, we preserve not just the dignity of others, but our own soul. What to do when you're the target? If you become the subject of mob outrage, 1. Don't feed the fire. Silence isn't weakness, it's often wisdom. 2. Anchor in truth. You are more than their narrative. 3. Find agape allies, those who won't join the chorus of condemnation. 4. Pray for clarity, not just to be vindicated, but to be refined. 5. Forgive in secret. It frees you from the poison. Agape doesn't promise a shield from suffering. It promises that suffering will not have the final word. Conclusion. The courage to love anyway. Mob mentality thrives on the illusion that love is weakness, that destruction equals justice, that public outrage equals moral authority. But agape is not interested in performance. It is interested in the soul. Agape listens when the world screams. It resists when everyone else follows. It speaks truth without cruelty and grieves even for its enemies. It carries the weight of love into places where love is no longer welcome. In an age of noise, agape is quiet. In an age of outrage, agape is slow. In an age of fear, agape is brave. And in the end, agape will outlast the mob.